All right, Robin's going to be handing you out a couple of pieces of paper here for you. We'll get rolling here in just a moment. I used to teach time management as it was, and I always started a time management class like 5 minutes late. It was weird. You know, you would wonder, yeah, that is an example of what not to do. Thank you. Did you run out or did you get them all?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. So you guys should have two note cards. You guys will have two note cards when it's all said and done here. We'll let everybody settle in. And first off, I want to thank Kathy and Kars for taking care of all of this.
Thank you, Jim.
If you know, we got to, and Robin and your team, which is most of you guys here, wonderful job yesterday. What do you guys say, huh? What a job yesterday. That was fantastic. Everything was really, really cool. We even got some cool lunches, which we do have up here. So hopefully it looks like everybody's got something there. And thanks to Ron, wanted to make sure we kept this for nostalgic purposes. So he got Wizard Pete in the back there. So thank you, Pete. Thank you, Ron, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Happy birthday, Marianne. 22? Yes. Did I read that right? 22?
23.
23. I'm sorry, I misread that. Yeah, nobody's counting. No, yeah, good for you. Yeah, and Tony's here.
Your choice. Oh, sure.
Sure, grab a lunch. Tony's like, grab a lunch. And Tony got, Robin's got something for you. Yeah.
I have some very exciting presents.
Very exciting presents. Thank you. Okay, all right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. It's the day after Professional Development Day, and most of us are very excited because the semester will start on Tuesday. And when we first think about that Tuesday, usually you would start on a Monday, but there is a very good reason why we're starting on Tuesday, and that is why we're celebrating the individual today. Monday will be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was established in 1983. After the career and everything that we learned today about Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, I should point out, my name is Jim Stockwell. For those of you that don't know me, I teach film and broadcast journalism here at MCC. I've had the pleasure of being here for about, 17 years? Holy moly. Wow. Have I been here that long?
10 when you started.
Thank you. Yeah, wow. I can't believe that. Yeah, I've been here a long time there. So, and I went full-time 4 years ago, which I was very excited. I was telling a little bit of the story there, which is wonderful. I have one of the greatest jobs in the world. I never actually considered it a job. I watch movies and talk about them. Wow. You know, I was talking to a colleague earlier today, and I said, hey, good for me for choosing the right particular path to study, right? You know, that sort of thing. So my background actually is in communication and speech. I do teach speech. We have one of the best speech teachers in Ron Compton here today. I hope I'm half as good as him when I get there. Yeah, Ron. And Ron would probably attest to what we're about to learn about Dr. Martin Luther King. He is known as maybe one of the greatest orators in American history. A lot of us talk about Abraham Lincoln. The one drawback to Abraham Lincoln, and I hold him in a very high regard, is we do not have any video of Abraham Lincoln. We have none. We have no idea what he sounded like. We hear the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural address, everything like that, but we just don't have the opportunity to actually see how he actually spoke. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King, we've had the pleasure of actually seeing that. One of our fellow speech teachers actually shows the full speech every year, and I get to listen to it in my office because it's right next to the classroom, and it gives me chills every time. So here's what I've got for us today. A couple of things. I've got an entire plan. Those of you know me, I have to have a plan before I do anything, right? My kids laugh at me. I got a color-coded calendar at home, everything like that. So our agenda for this afternoon is this. Of course, as you know, I do teach film, so it's kind of got a coming attractions feel here. So we're going to dream a little dream. All right, guys, these are the jokes. Okay, that's how this works. Okay, anyway, so we're going to dream a little dream. And then we're going to go 88 miles an hour for those of you that are Back to the Future fans. You know what we're going to do with that. And then we're going to set the table, which is kind of cool. And then we're going to do a couple of other things. We're going to prepare for the impact. We're not going to have Morgan Freeman talk about some sort of meteor or anything like that. That's not what we're going for, but you'll understand it. And then Michael and Garth. Yeah, I was expecting that. And as a matter of fact, I was hoping for that. So we'll talk about Michael and Garth. I know that sounds a really, really weird, but as you'll notice, it's at the end. That is an old teacher trick to keep you engaged until we get to the end of the story, right? So, speaking of the story, imagine, if you will. I was, as I was driving in this morning, I was thinking of the late John Lennon and his song Imagine, and in my film class we watched Forrest Gump, and we all know that Forrest is the one that gave John Lennon the inspiration behind writing Imagine. I think that's pretty common knowledge. But if we imagine, if we will, just kind of a peaceful feel. We're all eating lunch. I had a sign on my desk for years that said, wouldn't it be great if at 1 o'clock we all got milk and cookies and then laid down for a nap? Whatever happened to that, right? Why did we get rid of that? Somewhere between kindergarten and first grade, we messed that up, right? But anyway, what I'd like you to do for a moment is I want you to just imagine, just relax and peaceful kind of feel, just kind of, looking out there, out into the nature, everything like that. So one of the beautiful drives in... everything I love about this job, I love driving in here. It's just gorgeous to drive in here. I love the people I worked with. So, it's every day is just wonderful. So we're going to imagine, because what I want to do here in a second is one of the reasons why you've got the cards in front of you. Yeah, there's always a reason for everything, right? Okay, so here's what I want you to come up with. I want you to take a moment to dream. On one of those cards, I want you, we're not going to share it with anybody but ourselves, but I want you to think about it. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I want you just to dream. In my advanced film class, I tell my students this very topic. Dream and never discount an idea. You don't have to follow it, but you never know. So I want you to think, just relax, and I want you to just take a moment to dream and then write down something. It doesn't matter what it is. I want you to think of some sort of dream, something that you would like to see, something that you'd like to do, something you'd like to happen, something like that. Just kind of that peaceful relaxing. Because the whole idea behind this, as we talked about at the beginning, was a Dreamweaver, right? And Dr. Martin Luther King had a dream, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. But so think about, what is it that you'd want? What do you want? What would you like? It's always a weird thing for an instructor to be quiet in a classroom. Nobody likes that. We don't like the silence. And for those of you that have children, you know the exact thing that happens when you have silence in the house. Go find them, right? Right? I talk about it in a film class about how silence is has such a powerful impact on us, because when it is silent, our antenna goes up. It's like, well, something's happening, right? And if you're out in the forest or something, you're out walking, out in nature, and you don't hear anything, pick up the pace. Something's bigger than you, right? Yeah, that actually happened to me. That did. I was training for the Chicago Marathon, and I was running in a forest preserve, and I'm running around. And all of a sudden, I just hear my own breath. All right, no crickets, no birds, nothing. No car, nothing, right? I thought, oh, that's weird, because my senses are highlighted. I was already a parent. My wife and I already had children, so I'm like, wait a minute. So I make my loop, and I finish around, and I come home, and I tell my wife, see, I was out in that forest preserve, and there was no sound, nothing at all. She goes, oh, that's kind of weird. Next morning, I pick up the Mattoon Journal-Gazette, very front page. Mountain lion captured. Right where I was running. Yeah, so I think, everything else shut up. I was the only one making noise, right? And the only thing that I think that helped me was the mountain lion took one look at me and go, I ain't chasing that guy down. There's no meat on that guy, so I ain't bothering with that. But, silence has that kind of feel. Okay, so now that we've got that dream, you got that. And we don't have to share that with anybody. I just want you to keep that in the back of your head as we unfold everything today. So let's see here. Ready to go back in time, right? Yeah. One of my, I was up in Montana once doing some training when I worked for U.S. Bank, and I was up in Montana. I'm driving along, and all of a sudden cars are passing me. I was driving in the right lane, and cars are passing, boom, 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 boom. They're real fast. I'm like, what the heck, right? I'm doing 55 because I'm from Illinois, right? So I stop at this restaurant or whatever, and I said, what's the speed limit up here? He says, there's no speed limit during the day. I said, oh, really? So it didn't take me nearly as long to get back, as I was coming back. However, I was driving the car and I got to 85 miles an hour and then I kind of paused. That was about as far as I was going to go because I felt if I got to 88, I might end up back in 1953. So I was like, I'm just not going to tempt fate here at this point. But anyway, as we know, Doc Brown told us that if you go 88 miles an hour, you're going to see some serious stuff going on. Well, I know there was another term, but anyway. So here, let's go through some major events. We're going to go back to Dr. Martin Luther King a little bit and kind of unfold some of the things that he accomplished or things that happened to him during the time that he was with us. First off, he was born in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1929, which if you guys are historians, in 1929 we had the Great Crash. That was, the Black Friday, if it will, October 29th, 1929, the stock market crash. We started the Great Depression at that moment. But anyway, he was born to actually, contrary to popular belief, he was born to kind of a very affluent family. His grandfather and father were both ministers. And so he was not, it wasn't that rags to riches story that a lot of our early leaders had to overcome. Not that that means anything bad or anything like that. It was just kind of a unique situation. With that, though, he did have some opportunities that maybe some other people did not have, which is wonderful for us because the result was incredible, had an incredible impact on us. Anyway, so he was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. As we jump forward here, 1947, for those of you that have ever had my film class, know I'm a very big baseball fan, and in 1947, Jackie Robinson broke what was at the time called the color barrier. He became the first African American to play in the Major League Baseball. And that was 1947. And the reason I bring that up is because from 47 to 68, that 21 years was an incredible time in the United States. There was a lot that went on, and there's still a lot going on, but that was a very big event because as we see some of the other events that happened in Dr. Martin Luther King's life, some of it kind of leans back to Jackie Robinson and breaking the color barrier. So he was able to graduate from Morehouse College in 1948. He was actually pretty young to graduate. He was a very, very smart kid, was actually very charismatic. And that is not saying anything lightly. He was a very charismatic speaker. He very well liked by a lot of his peers. A lot of people enjoyed that. His ability to talk to just about everybody. He was very friendly, a very friendly type of guy, and he liked that. So anyway, when he graduated, he would continue on. He would go to a theological seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania. So he was still in Georgia, but then he went up to Pennsylvania, and that would have been 51. So it only took him 3 years, which is... Yeah, that's pretty good, right? Heck, it took me I don't even think I finished my degree now that I think about it. But anyway, it was pretty good that he was able to accomplish that in such a short amount of time. He also then met a woman that would stand by his side for the rest of his life, and that was Coretta Scott. And she was a very big influence in his life. They would have 4 children together, and she would stand by him forever and support everything that he did, because the man would travel for about 6 million miles in his lifetime and hit as many different countries that you could imagine. So she held down the fort. As they always say, behind every great man, there's a better woman kicking him in the fanny, right? And that's the woman that was kicking him in the fanny. So he spoke very, very highly of her. And then we also had a couple other things there. 55 would have been the famous bus boycott. That really started his movement. Here we are, we're only 8 years removed from Jackie Robinson actually making the major leagues. There was also, going sports-wise, there was a question about a guy by the name of Ernie Davis who would win the MVP of the Cotton Bowl, and they would not allow him to eat at the restaurant after, they have the celebration after they won the Cotton Bowl, and they would not allow the African Americans in the restaurant celebrate the winning of the Cotton Bowl. And his team decided that, there's better places that have better barbecue, and they all stayed together. So it was awesome, you know. But you know, at the time she didn't want to move in the bus there, and that was kind of a big thing. Everybody talks about that. So that was 1955. He started to get involved with a lot of stuff at that point there. In 56, unfortunately, it his house bombed. Was not the first time that he would have some sort of threats. He would also not be the last time, unfortunately. Good for him, there was nothing that ever, other than the house having the bombing, nobody was hurt, which is fantastic. But he did make his first major national address in D.C. in 1956. So he is you start to see this. Now again, we have to remember 1956, I liken it to Happy Days. Most of us, as I look among them, we all know what Happy Days was like. The 50s were kind of like that, but we were just out of World War II, so you still had some residue of that, but you still had a lot of issues where you had people, the segregation of schools, and again with Rosa Parks on the bus, and it was a bad time. It was a bad time. One thing, though, as I mentioned this, I was talking to Sarah Sullivan, who's one of our excellent history teachers. It's very difficult to put today's values on what happened years ago because we're not in that moment, you know. And so when we look back on it, yeah, hindsight's always 20/20, and we say it was a bad time. But at the time, that's what was going on, so we have to accept that. I also point that out in my film class when we watch a film in a period. I said, you know, it was written in a period. You know, a film that's written in 33 is going to have an entirely different context than a film that's written in 83. It's just different. So anyway, in 56, he started making major national addresses. He was then, of course, voted in 57 to the Leadership Conference, which would be several offices that he would hold. Again, it goes back to his charismatic personality. A lot of people liked him. He was very, very good looking. That doesn't necessarily mean, you know, good looking doesn't mean success all the time, but he had a charisma about him, and he was very, very eloquent when he spoke. And so people were drawn to him. He had this electric personality. And so he would be voted and nominated and given different positions, and he took them with the idea of advancing the civil rights movement as it would develop as time would go on. He would actually develop a very interest in Gandhi and his teachings, and so in 59 he would travel to India and learn from what Gandhi had taught. He was a pacifist. What I mean by that is he never carried a gun. He always thought of non-violent ways of getting something done, right? Unlike what we heard from Al Capone, right? Al Capone's famous quote was, "You get a lot further in this world with a kind word and a gun than you do with just a kind word." He was not on that side of things. He felt that, you know, marches and elements like that were much more effective. That's a debate we could get into a little later, but that's what he went about. So he figured out Gandhi was kind of in that same mold, and so he went to study him and to understand the pacifism and the ability to negotiate and talk to people and, you know, sit across the desk from somebody and say, we can get a lot more done, right? There was a line in one of the Marvel movies, right, is you can get a lot more done with 2 people in a room than you can with 100,000, right? You know, you get a negotiation, unless you got to move a piano. That's a different story. But for the most part, that we can do that, so he had that feeling. And then in 1960, we see a very, very momentous moment. John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960, and he would later meet with MLK, or Martin Luther King, and the two of them had kind of a unique relationship. A lot of people would say that when the support of John F. Kennedy to Martin Luther King's causes, it was a very narrow victory when he won in 1960. A lot of people believe that may have that swung that vote. That could be. You know, I'm not a historian. I'm not going to make that kind of connection, but that was part of it. But there was also some, you know, just like anything, there was a little bit of abrasion there. Some of the things that Martin Luther were doing and some of the things that JFK were doing, they didn't necessarily agree. Fortunately, Martin Luther King had the approach that, yeah, okay, I can appreciate your point of view. I don't have to like it, but I can definitely appreciate it, which is something that we should all think about. So JFK and MLK would actually have kind of a relationship for a little while, because we see him as the president, but Martin Luther was really moving, his advancement was really moving in that direction there. So now we get into 1963. And I almost feel like I'm lecturing here, so you guys will have to pull me apart. I'm lecturing, right? Yeah. So we get in 1963, which is a very, very interesting time. I was telling my office mate, Dr. Cameron, my father was in Korea in 1963, and he likes to tell the stories about some of the things that happened to him when he was out there. I'll enlighten you on that. So anyway, in 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King had the famous quote, "Is the time is always right to do what is right." He always felt that. He always felt that, you know, if you have the ability, you should do that. We always quote Uncle Ben saying, "With great power comes great responsibility," right? Well, Dr. Martin Luther King believed that if you had the ability, you had the accountability to do that. You should do something. And so 63 became a very, very interesting year. There were several activities that would go on in 1963 that would really kind of change the way that American history would kind of unfold from there. One of them, of course, had to do with what would happen in the latter part of 1963, and one of the main reasons why we're here today, and that had to do with the I Had a Dream speech, right? So as we see this, August 28th, so I want you to think for a minute, we're going to go back to putting our thinking caps on and imagine for a minute. It's August. And we all know what happens in August, right? It's like 175 degrees outside, right? Conservatively. It's hot. It's sticky. The world is different. Not everybody has air conditioning, right? You'd sit on blocks of ice. People would open up fire hydrants in the street, try to cool each other off. It was very, very, very hot. Actually, that summer was incredibly hot. And so we started to get this movement. Dr. Martin Luther King had kind of got a lot of people interested in the civil rights and being pacifists. He had been arrested at this point probably a half dozen times for many different things. Earlier in 63, he was put in prison. It was the famous letters from the Birmingham prison that he would write. His wife, again, was very, very supportive of what he did, even though he was getting thrown in jail all the time. I don't know about you guys, but it'd be kind of hard to have your spouse getting thrown in jail all the time. But she believed in what he was doing. And so in August of 63, they started to get together, the group. There was, think if you will, the Washington Monument. Most of us know what it is, that huge obelisk that's out in the mall there, real tall, skinny tower that sits out there. There's a reflecting pond that's right in front of it. And then at the other end of the reflecting pond is the Lincoln Memorial. So that's kind of where the great mall is in Washington, D.C. Anyway, he started to assemble. They assembled somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 people around that. And that is not Photoshop. That is not... Even the scene in Forrest Gump where he speaks about the Vietnam War, that is a complete and total Photoshop. Robert Zemeckis, the director of the film, talked about how they shot sections of people and then they just kind of Photoshopped it around it to make it look like there was all these people there. That was not the case here. We didn't have that. Bill Gates hadn't invented it, at Microsoft yet at this point. But that is a shot there. You were talking about 250,000, 250,000 people, right? It's the same amount of people you see on Black Friday at Walmart. But you have all these people. It's 100 degrees outside. Could you just imagine what that would have been like, right? And so he steps out onto there, and again, he's very charismatic, and he starts his speech. I can't even begin to tell you the power that the speech would have. But he starts the speech this way: 50 years ago, a great American, whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That's how he starts the speech. And 50 is 100. There you go. There's your little trivia. You're going to be at Buffalo Wild Wings, and that's going to come up, and you're like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Anyway, so that was 100. But if we think back historically, that was stated once before, right? That's what Abraham Lincoln said 77 years ago. That was 87 years ago. That's what he talked about. And so Dr. Martin Luther King followed that, and he grabbed that same feel, and he's outside of the Lincoln Memorial. Now, Ron, I know as a speech teacher, you teach this, how we have to write our speech, and we have to outline it, and we have to do all this research, and we got to do all this stuff. And Dr. Martin Luther King had done that. He was a very eloquent speaker, and so he had all this thoughts, and he had it all set out and everything. And so he's delivering the speech, And then something happened. He was reading it. And Ron goes, oh no, right? He was reading it. And part of the impact was in his mind, he's starting to lose a little bit of it. He was reading it. It was written incredibly well. But he was reading it, and all of a sudden, he changed. And he did what every speech student should do. I talk till I'm blue in the face when we teach speech class. He went extemporaneous. And that changed the entire process. He had his ideas, he still had it, but he went outside. He broke away from the mold, and he started to speak from the heart. And that's when he caught everybody. He had everybody going. They were interested in what he had to say, but you have to think about it. It's 100 degrees. Would you be listening to somebody in 100-degree weather? No, probably not. But once he got that charismatic element, he started to speak. And then he started to use repetition. And he started to use things. He actually incorporated a famous hymn, right? My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, O thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring. And he brought that in, and then all of a sudden he started to draw people in, and then he started to bring in that I have a dream. I have a dream. And he pointed out the things that he had dreams of. Different elements, different ideas, different things that he wanted. He wanted his children to be able to walk hand in hand with white children. You know, he wanted people to do that. He wanted people in New Hampshire to feel a certain way. He wanted the people in South Carolina to feel a certain way. He looked at it as a way of giving us a unity. And he pointed out that, you know what, even if you look at the picture, it's kind of distorted, but we can see white individuals, we can see black individuals, we can see all races were coming to listen to him speak and listen to it. He was able to cross a lot of the barriers with that, which was wonderful. And the extemporaneous delivery that he started to give, and that repetition that we teach in the speech class, the repetition, it brings you back. I have a dream. I have a dream. And every time he hit that, it brought the audience back in, and it was built into a crescendo. It's an incredible way of delivering a speech. Now, when I teach the speech class, I do tell them, I do not expect the I had a dream speech. No, you're not going to do that, right? They're not. This is their basic level speech class. This is probably one of their first speeches, and a lot of times it's their only speech class they want to take. They figure, I'll get my 3 credit hours and I'll move on and I'll do something else, right? I understand that. I even tell them, I said, look, you know, I have a associate's degree just like you. I have a bachelor's degree in communication. I got a master's degree in communication, and I still mess up words constantly. All right, I got 90 hours of classroom time in studying speech, right? That's why I tell them when I teach a class for 3 hours, I say, you think I could fill 3 hours. Don't worry about it. Those of you that have talked to me in the hallway know I can fill 3 hours. Right? I'm not expecting that. But if you follow the process, you can be effective. And that's what Dr. Martin Luther King, he kind of went back and he had the audience and he had them. And he was pulling them in, and I had a dream, and I have a dream, and I have a dream. And what he was wanting was people to have the courage to stand up and to do what they want to do, to follow that dream. He had a dream himself. What started that dream? That's interesting, right? We go, why did he have that dream? He come from an affluent family? Good-looking man? Well-educated? Why in the world did he could have just went to be a minister and just, lived on Easy Street, right? Watch, it's the 60s, you could have watched the Giants win a couple of Super Bowls or whatever, Why did he do that? What was it? He was 6 years old. He was out playing in the yard. And one of the kids that was playing with him said he had to go home and couldn't play with him anymore because his grandmother didn't like the fact that he was playing with a black kid. 6 years old. And he knew already then. It's terrible. Just terrible, right? He was 6 years old, and he said, it was my friend I played in the yard with. Now I couldn't play with him anymore because his grandmother said that you can't play with a black kid. That may have ignited the dream. I'm not saying that was the actual reason, but that was part of it. In his biography, he mentions that. And I said, hey, you know what? That's what happened to me. I was a kid. I don't know racism as a kid, right? The only thing we know about is when we're a kid is when do we steal the next cookie, right? 6 years old. That's what happened. So he had this feeling that, you know what, I want my kids to play with whoever. I had 4 children, two boys, 2 girls. Wanted them to play with whoever they wanted. And so he went about it in a manner of trying to tell them to do things. But he strongly suggested that you don't do it in violence and you don't be satisfied with just a little movement. You've got to continue it, right? And we can't stand on our laurels. We can't stand on what we've already accomplished. We have to continue. Revolution moves. Movement only moves for a certain spot. So you have to keep going. We're not going to change anything if we're satisfied at some point. And that was kind of his whole philosophy. I'm not satisfied. Let's continue to do this. Let's move from this point. And it was very powerful, the message, because he was somebody that in the 60s, which was a lot of, everybody was complaining about pretty much everything. But you had a lot of you had a lot of feelings of, inequality, everything like that. And he said, hey, no, let's be peaceful about it. We can do that. And so it had a powerful impact, and it reached a lot of different people. Now, we didn't have the internet like we have today, so we didn't have it. I know that's kind of weird, right? We didn't have the internet. It's funny when I tell that to students, they're like, we didn't have internet? I said, yeah, heck. Yeah, I wrote a term paper on a typewriter. You know what that is? Like a typewriter, yeah, okay. So we didn't have the internet, so we don't have that. So basically it's word of mouth, and it's possible. I was not there. I know I look old enough to be there. I was not there that day. I wasn't there that day, but maybe the legend grows as, what did R.E.O. Speedwagon tell us, right? The tales grow taller down the line, no matter how it goes. That could very well be. But some of the things that happened afterwards were very, very unique. Here's a few very interesting pictures that I thought about. Here is him with John F. Kennedy up in the White House there. You see him over there, he's kind of left. He's actually a fairly short fella, apparently. I did not realize that until I did some research on him. I'm like, I guess he was kind of short. But you have John F. Kennedy there, so he had that kind of relationship. This individual right here is Malcolm X. And this, oddly enough, it was in March 26, 1964, was the first and only time those two men would cross paths. And they couldn't have been more polar opposite. Even the picture suggests kind of an opposite approach. Malcolm X was, I'm not trying to pass judgment, but he felt, if we got to get our point across, you get a point across any way necessary. And so there may have been that. He also had some interesting life experiences that were a little different than Dr. Martin Luther King. Again, I'm not suggesting there's anything necessarily wrong with it. We're all different. If we were all the same, how boring would that be? But he had a different approach, and Dr. Martin Luther King knew that. And they met, and they only spoke for a little over a minute, which is really kind of two icons of the movement of the 60s only met for a minute. But Martin Luther mentioned that he thought that it was great that Malcolm X was doing what he was doing. He just didn't agree with the method that he was going about it. The two of them would never meet again. That would be it. Malcolm X would get assassinated, as would Dr. Martin Luther King. If you have time, I did see a film called Malcolm X. It was done by Spike Lee. Again, we've got to look through it, the filter of Spike Lee, but he did that. Denzel Washington plays Malcolm X, and it is a spectacular film. It was very, very well done. But that was the only time the two of them would actually meet. Again, they were about as polar opposite as it got. To the left of them there, he was 35 years old at the time, and he would win the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1964, he would be the youngest winner of the Nobel Prize in history, and I believe at this time is still the youngest winner ever. He took the money, was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $55,000 that you get for winning the prize at the time, and he donated it more to the civil rights movement, so he did not accept it, and he was one of the youngest individuals ever to win that. Up there, though, that is actually a very disturbing picture right there. That's in Memphis, Tennessee, and if you're looking closely, I believe that is Jesse Jackson, I think, is right there, and that was outside of the Lorraine Hotel, where he did spend some time in Memphis. They used to call it, he had a good friend named Abernathy, and they called it the Abernathy King Suite that they used to go to in this hotel there. And they happened to be there. Dr. Martin Luther King had showed up for there was an issue with the garbage workers, the trash workers. They were striking. There was some issues with fair labor and everything like that. And so they had actually invited Dr. King down to see if they could try to maybe have some sort of peaceful demonstration. He was going to organize a walk, everything like that. And that's why he happened to be in Memphis. And that would have been in latter March. And then it was not long after, it was about 4 years after he had met Malcolm X. This would have been 1968 at this point. And on April 4th, he had stepped out onto the balcony, and it turned out that James Earl Ray was across the street, and James Earl Ray would shoot him in the cheek, and it would lodge through and end up in his spinal column. And then they would rush him to a hospital, but he would be dead. It depends. I was not there. Some say he was dead on arrival. Some say he died there. But he was assassinated at that point. James Earl Ray had fled the country. It was about a 2 year, it was 2 months. 2.5 months of a manhunt to try to find him, but they eventually did. Anyway, that was one of the last pictures of him right outside of that hotel there. When he was shot, the impact was incredible. There was there was riots everywhere. You had people, they felt that, especially James Earl Ray being, they couldn't find it. They felt there was a conspiracy around it. It was terrible what had happened at that point. And it was part of a list of situations that really occurred around this time. Just think about this. And regardless of your political affiliation or anything like that, inside of 5 years, we would lose John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy, all to assassination. Actually, Kennedy and King it was only 2 months apart before they would die there. And so think about how America would have been different at that time had any of those individuals actually survived. It was a truly interesting time, a lot of turmoil. From that point forward, we see a really interesting move into the 70s. Again, he was shot in 68, so we really hadn't got out of the 60s yet. We would land on the moon in 69, and then the 70s would change, and you would see, of course, the resignation of a president. And then you would also later see a hostage situation, and it wouldn't really be until the 80s where things really didn't start to stabilize again. It was a really kind of amazing thing. 1983, we finally passed the law that we would have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That would be in the third Monday, which happens to be this coming Monday at that point. So it's a very, very interesting and very turbulent time. So when we go back and look at the actual speech that he gave, his speech had to do with trying to give people the incentive to go out and do what they think is right at the time. And so we look back on some of the elements that he said, some of the things, and most of the young kids, and Ron, you probably would agree with me, most everybody thinks about, I had a dream, I have a dream, thank God Almighty, I have a dream. We don't really think about what he was trying to accomplish. And what he really was trying to accomplish was peace. He wanted people to get along. And that was really what he was going for. Those individuals, I found it an interesting picture when I was looking through the internet there, because if it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right? So I found it a very interesting picture that somebody had put those guys together. And I just found it interesting because of what had happened during that time frame there, that each one of them had a significant impact on our society at that time. But we don't think about that today. That's why I said, just think. If Kennedy would have finished out his presidency, how different would the world have been? And had Robert Kennedy survived and became a president, which was the idea, I think that they had him lined up, right? What would have happened at that point? What could have happened? We find it to be a very unique time. We also have to remember that My father, again, was in Korea in '63. We had Vietnam coming in there right in the latter '60s as well. So you had a lot of turbulence in the world. And Dr. King being assassinated, he wanted them to continue on the idea of peaceful, a peaceful approach. But we start to see a lot more violence. We saw, when he got shot, we had riots, which is really kind of unique, you would think, right? Why would we do something like that? So when we look at the impact that this man had, we often overlook some of the turbulence that happened beforehand. The elements of the rioting, the wars that we had, and they were not really considered war because it was more movements. And Vietnam, my dad, I mentioned earlier, my dad was in Korea in '63, and he was issued live ammunition on November 22nd. He had no idea what was going on. He thought World War III started. He did. He tells me the story about it. For 12 hours, he was in a foxhole waiting for Charlie to come across the line. He thought World War III had started. Right? As it turned out, that was the day that Kennedy was shot. And he had no idea. It's not like today, right? We were Judy and I, my office mate Judy Cameron, we were talking about when Reagan was shot. I remember the day that Reagan was shot, right? At least the media was a little bit quicker. We could figure it out. He was okay. Actually, the concern was more for Brady, who would take the brunt of that. But Reagan was okay. We had that. But at the time when Kennedy was shot, nobody really knew what was going on. We didn't have the kind of social media that we had today. And one of the things that is interesting about the aftermath of it is that James Earl Ray said that he knew about it, but he wasn't the guy that killed him, and that's where we get a lot of conspiracies and everything like that. What I do find very, very unique is that Dexter, which is one of Dr. Martin Luther King's sons, actually visited Ray in prison. They talked, and he was convinced that no, he didn't kill my father. He didn't, and he was actually trying to, and he forgave him, which is, God, that's tough, man. If somebody took my father, I'd have a hard time forgiving somebody like that. And he actually was a proponent of saying, hey, you know what? We should retry this guy, see if there's something else here. Maybe he was wrongfully accused, whatever. But he actually believed that, and that's tough. And that was one of the things that Dr. Martin Luther King tried to preach to us is. There's always a way to negotiate it without the violence, and that was what he was trying to do. History books will talk about that. It's unfortunate that he was shot. He was killed with violence. He was in a very violent time, but he went about it in a much more pacifist approach. One of the things that comes up, though, when we think about Dr. Martin Luther King is that final point about I had a dream. Remember, he broke away. He had this written speech, and it was very eloquent and everything like that, but when he broke away and became extemporaneous and then started using that repetition to I had a dream, one of the things that comes up is that what was the dream? What was he wanting to do? And earlier I mentioned Michael, right? Michael, and you're probably, okay, Michael, the archangel, is that it? For those of us Catholics in here, right? The archangel. Who is Michael? I've been talking about him all day. Even Judy came up to me. She's like, you put the wrong name on the PowerPoint, right? I said, no, actually, his name was Michael. His name was Michael King. Yeah, Marianne. You're like, wow, yeah. Ask me why. Why? Hey, there we go. Okay, you guys got it. Okay. Why? Well, he was originally Michael King, and his father was Michael King Sr. But as I had mentioned earlier, he had his father was a minister, and his father actually liked what Martin Luther had done, the pacifist, everything that he had done, and so he had changed his name to Martin Luther, and so did Martin Luther Jr. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting, because Judy came up here. She made a point to come all the way up here today, and she's like, you put the wrong name on the PowerPoint. And I'm like, I'm glad you caught that. Let me tell you why. So he changed his name because he wanted to go about that. So there you go. If you don't remember anything else, you know that Martin Luther King was actually Michael King, right? And I connected, when I thought about his speech, and I've read it many a times. I've got a book in my office that has the speech, everything like that. And I've listened to it. Denny plays it every semester when he teaches the speech class. I've listened to it over and over again. I've had the privilege of watching the video. And it is an incredibly inspiring speech. But I've often thought that when he gets to the end, it's 17 minutes long. And I've been talking for, 45 minutes, and you're going, are you done yet, right? 17 minutes long in 100-degree weather, that's a lot, right? And so I've often thought that he kind of left it hanging. I believe that. I believe that he left that, right? He finishes his speech with this line. This is how he finishes the speech. He says, "And when this happens, we allow freedom to ring. We let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We've been able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last." And for years, I remember thinking to myself, even when I studied it, he didn't finish it, right, Ron? Right? We talk about finish the speech, right? Finish the speech. And I'm like, wow, how would he have finished the speech? How, it's 100 degrees outside. He's trying to get everybody out of the mall, right? How do you finish it? So I thought about it. And as odd as it would be, I figured it out one day as a DJ. Yeah, I was a DJ for years. Believe that or not, I actually could talk on the radio. Yeah, it's like that. As a DJ. I was a country DJ. And there was a song that Garth Brooks had that, oddly enough, finishes the thought. And I know you're like, really? Yes, it does. It finishes the thought. And he caught a lot of flack for it, caught a lot of problems for it. But when he put the speech, when he put that song out there, he actually had a very, very big impact. And so as we wrap it up today, what I thought would be a great way is for you to hear the words that Garth Brooks put into that song and how that impact actually, and it adds to the I Had a Dream speech. So the powerful words at the end, right? When money talks for the very last time and nobody walks a step behind, when there's only one race and that's mankind, we shall be free. Now I know it's kind of a stretch, but I think if Dr. Martin Luther King were alive today, I think he'd put his arm around Garth Brooks and sing that song, don't you think? I think he'd be proud. And how much more American could it have been? One of the greatest leaders of the 20th century and one of the greatest music artists of the 20th century singing hand in hand. I think that would work. So here's what I intend for you guys to do as you get ready for the weekend and also on Monday when you celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Follow that dream that you have written on that piece of paper. Take it with you, put it up on your mirror, put it in your wallet, do something with it, refer back to it. It's only between you and yourself, and you should always try to think about that. Okay? And, when you see somebody along the way, maybe help them out, maybe smile. Maybe that's the only time that you run into them. But if we're all on the same page, I guess we're all free. Thank you. Yeah.